It's time again for the Insiders with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.
Hi, I'm Scott Jensen, former Assembly Speaker.
I'm Chuck Chvala, former Senate Majority Leader.
And we're the Insiders. You know, Chuck, on election nights, I used to let the rest of my team call the winners because lots of people were calling the winners. I would call the losers because I knew in that group there were people who had a future, people I wanted on the ballot again. So looking at the people who lost races for Congress, the United States Senate this time around, are there any people in there that you think might have a strong future in the upcoming elections?
It's interesting you say that, Scott. I'll never forget that a person who ultimately worked on our caucus came up to me one time and said, Chuck, you were the only person who wrote to me after the election and thanked me for running. And I think this is a good example of a year like that. And I expect that Greta Newbauer will and some other people will reach out to the people who lost, because they not only is it possible that they'll be there in the future, but the other thing is they served an important function in democracy. Less than 1% of the people in this country ever run for public office. It's an important thing to put your name on the ballot. And I always admire, whether it's the Republican or the Democratic side. But turning to the people who lost, I think there are some remarkable people on the Democratic side who I expect you will see. I think Kristen Lyerly is eventually going to be elected to a Democratic post, whether it's Congress, state Senate, something else. But she is a remarkable candidate, a hardworking person, brilliant, and does a great job. And I think with reproductive rights becoming such an issue, and it will be for a while, I think you'll see her run again, whether it's for Congress or for something else. Obviously, in that district, that district would have to be made different for her to be able to do it in Congress. But that's not the only place where she could run and be effective. The other person who's, I think, obviously poised to do it would be Rebecca Cook. And I think that there's still an opportunity. We'll see about whether there's any chance for changes in the nature of the districts. There's no way that a state like Wisconsin should be a 6-2 state, given that we're clearly a 50-50 state. Donald Trump wins by a point, Tammy Baldwin wins by a point. That's an outrageous gerrymander, and I still think there's a chance that that could change. So those two people, Peter Barca, perhaps not. Peter Barca, I felt, was doing something for the cause, trying to make sure that things were good and Democrats had a good person on the ballot to raise the voice of Democrats. It was a great thing for him to do on his part. Maybe Peter doesn't run again, but he's certainly one of those guys that everybody says they want to be in office. Someone who hews closer to the middle, understands business and small business, worked in that when the administration at one point for doing small business work for the federal government. He's a great guy. But I don't know if Peter will run again, but I was sure happy to see him on the ballot this time. And that's just on the Democratic side. And I think a lot of the Assembly people will be running again. So I think you're going to see some people out there. Joe Plouffe, I wish Joe Plouffe would be in the legislature. I'd love to see it, but I don't know that Joe is going to run many more times. So what do you think on the Republican side, Scott?
Well, first of all, I'm going to agree with you on Rebecca Cook here in the 3rd congressional district. I mean, she came within 3 points. She was found to be an extraordinary fundraiser, which was her old job before she became a candidate herself. She wasn't up to debating and necessarily competing with Van Orden on the messaging at this point, but that's something you can learn over time. And the 26th climate is going to be very, very different for Republicans, particularly in a seat like that. So I would expect to see Cook on the ballot again. That's a race that she could win, but Lyerly is not going to win the 8th congressional district. She couldn't win the Senate seat underneath it. I just don't think that she has much of a future, but I do think you're right about Cook. On the Republican side, I think one of the stars who fell just short on election night was Eric Hovde, who came within a percentage point of being Wisconsin's United States Senator. That's a statewide election. He spent an incredible amount of money. He built a great organization, and though they didn't start out well in that campaign, they found their footing in late August, early September, and caught up remarkably. He just ran out of time. Otherwise, I think he was going to win that. I can't believe he's not thinking to himself, boy, after that huge investment of effort and my own personal resources, maybe I should look at another statewide race, one that maybe matches better with my executive experience, like governor. And he would be a very strong candidate for Republicans in a race for governor in 26.
One question I have about that, this guy really, it's one thing to be a U.S. Senator. Believe it or not, legislative positions, even at the U.S. Senate level, are not really full-time jobs. They don't have to be. And he seems like the kind of guy who could fly in and vote and leave. Governor is a different story. It's a full-time commitment and it's a strong commitment. I just wonder if that's the kind of commitment he wants to make to the state. He does live in California, even though he has a residence here in Wisconsin. And does he really want to spend the winters here in Wisconsin and go through all that and be going through the day-to-day and legislative battles that he'll be going through, because he probably will have a Democratic legislature? I'll be interested to see if he really wants to do that, if that's the lifestyle he wants for 4 years after that. But people do love to run for politics, and he's maybe whetted his appetite. Maybe he will be, but I suppose it's possible he certainly would be a strong candidate. I think it'll be a losing candidate, and he'll be surprised that he'll lose by more in a gubernatorial year than in a presidential year. I could see it, but I just wonder if he really wants that for his personal lifestyle.
Well, he proved himself to be a very hardworking candidate throughout the race. He was everywhere. And it was just amazing to me how many times I saw him running around the circuit, around the state again and again and again. And I think he was a much humbler candidate the second time around than when he ran in 2012. And that did him well. I think he was much more willing to listen to people. He was, I think, a much more compassionate person when you saw him than when he did it before. So I think, boy, when you run and you get that close, the sense that there's a lot of people who are like, I got to do this again. I just got to give it one more try. So we'll see what 26 brings.
See you next time.
You've been listening to The Insiders with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.